Have you just sat the AAA exam and want to know what came up on the other variants, the ones that you didn't see? Do you want to know what I thought of your variant of the exam? Or are you prepping for a later exam sitting and you want to know what came up in the past so that you can get an idea of what might come up in your paper? Well, you've landed in the right place. This video is going to tell you all about what happened in the March 24 AAA exam. And here are my big takeaway points, the executive summary. Firstly, there were a few more tech issues on exam day than there were in the previous exam sitting. ACCA haven't got it perfect yet with this remote invigilation, and there definitely were some issues, but a lot of my students are now able to sit the spare exam 1 week later. So perhaps not such a big deal. There was an error in one of the questions. In one of the question ones, it specifically told you to use Exhibit 5, and there wasn't an Exhibit 5. So that threw some people. I think if the ideal approach for you in the exam is if something like that happens, you just move on, right? You just work with what you've got and you don't let it throw you. Because something like that, it can happen. You know, ACCA do have a lot of quality control procedures in place, but obviously things do slip through the net. There were lots of knowledge-based questions in this exam, which is something we saw in December 23, but we haven't seen for ages before that in AAA. I'm feeling like this is a slightly different style from the examiner. Most students got at least 5 marks in their exam that was pure knowledge, not using the scenario, which is something that the examiner said they weren't going to do in AAA, but they have been doing. So watch out for that if you're preparing for future exam sittings. There was a lot of financial reporting in this exam. Quite a lot around leases, which is something that I tipped, but there were lots of other things as well, like assets held for sale, discontinued operations, pensions, lots of financial reporting required. You must have sat SBR before you do AAA. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle with all that financial reporting stuff. And it's really important when you're prepping for this exam that you do go back over your SBR notes in detail. There were some pretty unusual questions in this exam. It didn't always follow the standard format. Yes, some students got a normal question 1, which followed the standard approach of risk, procedures and ethics, but other people didn't. You know, there were some twist questions here. And I think the learning point is you've got to be ready for anything in this exam. Expect the unexpected, because the examiner likes to keep us on our toes. You need to be the student that gets something unexpected and goes, oh, everyone's going to find that hard. I'll problem solve. Not the student who goes, oh, I wasn't expecting this. I can't do it. This is unfair. Because if you have that mindset, you're really going to struggle with anything unusual that comes up. And increasingly, we are seeing unusual things. We're also learning that ACCA absolutely love football. There was a whole 50-mark question that was based on a football club. And if you've been looking at what comes up in the SBL case study, for the March 24 sitting, the SBL case study was all about a football club. So if you were doing SBL at the same time as doing AAA in the March exam sitting, you would have been very happy because you'd have really thought in detail about football clubs and perhaps thought of some of the issues that were in that question. Now, I think that is a pure coincidence, by the way. Don't, in future exam sittings, think I need to look at what's in the case study because that might be in the AAA exam. It's a totally different examining team, and I think it just happened by coincidence. I'm very surprised that nobody more senior in the exam structure at ACCA went, hold on, we can't have the case study and one of the technical exams being on the same topic because that's unfair, because students who are doing the case study have got a bit of a leg up for that exam. So I'm really surprised that they let it happen, but it did happen, and I think it is an oversight rather than anything malicious. A little bit like that Exhibit 5 reference when Exhibit 5 didn't really exist. Right, now let's go on into the detailed questions. Now, those sitting the exam in the morning, so the first half of the day, those people got June as their Section A 50-mark question. This was based on a football club, and this is where if you were sitting SBL at the same time, you're doing really happy. Now, this question, I'm told, was really, really time-consuming, really time-pressured. It started with a really quite unusual question around planning and audit strategy, and how the auditor should respond to certain matters. Quite a weird first question. You don't have to do the questions in order though, because the second question was a much more standard risk of material misstatement question that included technical FR issues around sale and leaseback, player valuations, there was a dominant chairperson with some ethical issues. So that was quite a standard question, I think. And then there was a question that we've seen actually quite a lot in recent exam sittings, where they give you a specific issue or risk and then ask you to justify why it's high risk. Now, this one was particularly around player valuations and intangible assets there. And linked to that, you had to do audit procedures around a specific assertion, and that was the valuation of those intangible assets, those players. That's something that I've been tipping. Actually, two things here that I was tipping for this exam were leases and audit procedures for a specific assertion. So hopefully that was helpful to you if you got this variant of the exam. And then there was an ethics requirement at the end for 6 marks. So this question was the more normal of the Section A questions. The other Section A question, which was the one that students got if they sat this exam in the later half of the day, this was an oil and gas company called Magenta. Quite different as a business to a football club, anyway. So it started comfortably. Business risks for 10 marks. Lovely. Most students quite enjoy business risks. But then it got a bit weird. You'd normally think I'm going to have to do risk of material misstatement or audit risks. But no. What they did instead was give you 3 ROMs, 3 specific risks, and ask you to kind of justify why those were significant risks of material misstatement. So you didn't have to do your standard things like assess materiality of each one, and you didn't have to do your typical having a paragraph on materiality because, well, this was already done for you, I think, from what I'm told. So this was quite unusual, and it threw students. But something that was more normal was having to do an audit procedures requirement around a specific assertion, and this was around impairment of some assets. And then there was an ethics requirement and the implications on planning for the audit. So a kind of audit implications question, which is what I was tipping. And it was based around a fraud, some bribery. So this one, of the two, I'd rather have had the football club, I think. But both of them had plenty of areas where you could pick up marks. On to Section B of the exam, and as always in Section B, you get 2 25-mark questions, one of them focused on reporting. So the reporting questions, there were 3 reporting questions that came up. The first of them, which people seemed to get earlier in the day, was around, well, it had actually a knowledge question to start off with, talking about the auditor's responsibilities around going concern. So that was 7 marks and a theoretical question there where you didn't really have to use the scenario. Something we're seeing increasingly from this examiner, which I don't like it, but it's happening. Anyway, then it went on to 3 different scenarios, all of which had an emphasis on going concern, different going concern issues. And for each of them, you had to kind of discuss the scenario, explain some financial reporting, and the potential impact on the audit report of each of the 3 scenarios. Now, I quite like a question with 3 scenarios, because if you struggle in one of them, you can just move on to the others using your exam technique. Then the second question variant again started with a kind of theory part. This one was about groups and component auditors. And then it was almost like a quality management question next, where you had to assess the matters to consider and the evidence that should be on file. And this one was particularly around pensions, but there was some other stuff as well. And then you had to assess the impact on the audit report if these matters had not been accounted for correctly. Fairly typical part, those two parts, the matters and evidence and the audit report, but the theory bit at the start, unusual. And then the third requirement, again, it had a theoretical requirement around audit quality and the audit committee. How do they assess the quality of the auditors? That is an unusual question. And then, it was onto a more normal question. Second part of it was matters and evidence, and this one was particularly around assets held for sale and discontinued operations. Some nice technical financial reporting. Again, something the examiner seems to love. And the impact on the audit report if something hadn't been accounted for correctly. So those reporting questions, I was surprised here because we haven't seen a question for quite a while on critically evaluating an audit report. And that didn't come up in March. We also didn't get anything on reporting to those charged with governance. That's something the examiner loves. So if you're using this video to help you prep for future exam sittings, I would be thinking about that and going, those things will be due to come up. Then on to the second Section B question. And the second Section B question will always be not about reporting. It'll be on something else. And from what I can work out, there were two question variants that came up here. The first one, you had to talk about audit committee responsibilities. Unusual. Again, a knowledge requirement, mainly knowledge. And then you were asked about matters to query around some financial information that you were given and some almost like a procedures question, some additional information. What additional information would you require to audit a lease effectively? So that's quite an unusual question. Right? We haven't seen really anything quite like this before. And the other question was also quite unusual. It was a big ethics question, and we haven't had a big ethics question for quite some time in AAA. But it wasn't a normal ethics question. You were given 3 ethical threats, and you were given the safeguards for them. And you had to kind of assess the ethical threat, assess the safeguards that had already been put in place, comment on them, and then suggest extra safeguards that would be helpful for the auditor to put in place. So a big ethics question for 10 marks, but an unusual one. And then there was a second requirement. It was a totally different company. But here they were an existing client, but not an audit client. So we'd done some assurance work for them, and they were listing, and we were being invited should we do that audit work? And there were lots of ethical issues around it. So lots and lots of ethics in that question variant. So overall, yes, this was quite a hard set of exam questions, I think. Yes, there were some unusual questions that came up. Yes, there was lots of knowledge stuff in this exam. But you need 50% to pass, right? You don't need to smash every single part of the exam. And with great exam technique, you would have been able to accumulate 50 marks in all of the variants of this exam that came up, even if you got some slightly unusual questions. The better your technique is, the better your chance of passing. And on my course, we focus massively on technique. That's why I get the pass rates and success rates that I do amongst my students. So best of luck for results, those of you who are waiting on your March 24 results. If you need help smashing the AAA exam, then get in touch.